This is the Board of Selectmen's meeting for April 22nd, 2014. The Marathon, 118th edition of the Marathon Plus One today. And we're going to start with the moment of silence for our servicemen and women serving in Afghanistan. Thank you. A reminder that the meeting is being recorded. We have to tell you that every time we come. We're starting today with a, let's see, the appointments isn't until 7:15, so we'll do the action items then, I guess. Superintendent Feeney requests selectmen vote to remove the trees from the sidewalk in front of the former Lord's building. And we had a couple of letters I saw, Mike, about that, or Chris, whoever's going to update us on this.
Yeah, the tree warden sets a hearing on that.
Mm-hmm.
I think what people need to understand is we're taking them out because they have reached their full life or close to it, and they are going to be replaced with
new
more
trees.
appropriate trees.
Trees, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
So
we were told that.
Yeah, and we've been advised that in order to give the trees sufficient room to space out,
Yeah.
we should replace the 5 trees with 4. So this is all being done as part of the sidewalk project that we discussed with Roach Brothers.
Good.
So it's not that we'll have no trees, it's just that we're going to have more appropriate trees, and trees that are not within 10 years of the end of their expected lifetime. So is there anything more that we need to do on that, just other than to,
Just take a vote?
yeah, we asked for a vote.
Does he have a tree hearing yet?
He did on 4/18. Mr. Chairman, I struggled with that because, one, that is always fought to try to keep the trees, but in listening to Mike Reeder's convinced me, as you just said, we need the proper type of tree, the tree that the roots grow down, not into the sidewalks without buckling the sidewalk. Although I will take, there's a Barbara Mayer wrote a suggestion, maybe we can throw out to our engineer and Roach Brothers, that the 4 trees in the front, and she suggests, would it be possible to put one on South Street, adjacent to the Lord's building, that would soften the current starkness along South Street? I don't know if that's possible or not. If you could take a look at that, then maybe that could be the place for the 5th tree. And I don't know, I know it's in an intersection, you probably have to be down so many feet from an intersection so that eventually that's not going to cause vision issues or anything.
The other problem might be with that location, that's where both the gas and water lines enter the building. They replaced the water main last week, and they're doing the gas main this week, so depends on whether that would interfere with the tree roots, but we can...
Could we have our engineers and the tree warden and maybe Mike Guido take a look and see if that's possible?
It's a very good idea, because that is a sort of a stark-looking area. That would be great to soften it that way. So do we have a motion to remove the trees, then?
I make a motion that we go with the recommendation of the tree warden to remove the 5 trees and replace them with at least 4 others properly spaced in front of the old Lord's building.
I'll second, I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Our next item is a resignation letter from Rob Gregg, resigning from both the Cemetery Commission and Aesthetics and Sidewalk Study Committee.
So moved.
And I will second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Not sure we actually need to vote on that one, but that's fine.
Accept it.
We're covered in case. And then we have a vote to sign a settlement agreement with the Medfield Firefighters Association. Chris?
This was a grievance that we've had going on for about a year now, and it was set to go to arbitration, and about 48 hours before we were going to sit down at with the arbitrator, we were able to reach a settlement, and the grievance
Good.
has been withdrawn.
Excellent.
Unfortunately, we still each have to pay our fair fee for the arbitrator. We split the fee in half, but we still need to do that, but at least we've avoided going to the whole process.
Are you able to illuminate us as to the grievance and the issues?
Not at this time.
Okay. But you do recommend that we sign the settlement agreement, obviously, if you negotiated it?
Yes, it's been withdrawn, and it's been handled.
So do we have a motion to sign the settlement agreement?
So moved.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Yep. Final review of the town meeting warrant articles.
That's going to take some time.
Well, is it going to take that much time? We already talked about, I thought we already covered most of this
Yeah.
before.
Been a few changes, and we had a meeting last week with the moderator,
Yep.
town clerk, town council, and myself.
Mhm.
And there are a few changes, and you ought to be aware of some of the warrant committee votes.
Okay.
So,
All right.
been a couple of referrals, price increase, and
Why don't we do our other remaining item then, which is a Medfield State Hospital status update, and a copy of legislation was filed by Senator Tilmety and Representatives Garlick and Dooley. I know that I had heard that there was a committee hearing on that already.
And that's in your, copy of the legislation is in your folder, and everything points to the fact that it should not have any issues going forward. I reported last week that I was going to meet with Mary Beth Clancy to talk about the water tower and the well field. We actually had to postpone that meeting until tomorrow morning. So at your next meeting, I'll have an update on to when we can do the land transfer for
Oh,
that.
good, excellent, good.
There was
So we're moving quickly.
There was actually a piece on the radio this morning about why legislation takes so long to get enacted. They were comparing it to the upskirting legislation, which got done in one day. And they were saying that the Massachusetts legislature actually enacts fewer statutes every year than all but 3 other states in the country. It was New York, New Jersey, and Minnesota, I think. But the thing that was interesting, but the other thing that I thought was interesting was that about half of the legislation is actually specific for either a person or a person or a town. So that the legislature in Massachusetts actually regulates a lot more, I think, than legislatures in other states.
Well, actually, what it is you have a whole lot of special legislation for alcohol licenses, and you have a whole lot of legislation for sick bags. So.
For what?
To create sick bags for individuals who've exhausted at the state level.
Oh, yeah.
So, how productive it is, I think, is open to discussion.
Well, I think one of the interesting things when they were doing the water tower and the well field legislation was the same thing on the docket that day was the state sandwich, so.
Yeah.
What is the state sandwich?
I don't know if they ever decided it that day, I didn't stay.
Gotta be the fluffernutter. All right, so now it's 7:15, so we'll have the public hearing, all alcohol license application from Theodora Jauga, DBA Solizia LLC, located at 18 North Meadow Street, formerly From Scratch. Is there someone here from that?
Good evening, hello. My name is Teodoro Jauregui.
You say that.
Teodoro,
Yeah.
well, yeah. That's for a
So much
fact.
better than I do.
I was born in Massachusetts, and my mother was born in Massachusetts,
Yeah.
and I grew up in Needham and went to Needham High, and I live in Newton right now. Teodoro is just a Spanish Theodore, so
Okay.
you can call me Teddy.
Yeah.
And the name of the restaurant is Sociala, which
Okay.
is a Basque word that means social.
Okay,
And the idea is to have a restaurant with Basque cuisine.
oh, okay.
I don't know, a lot of people are familiar with it, a lot of people aren't, but it's sort of a very, I don't want to say trendy because I don't like that word, but sort of up and coming as far as when people go to Spain, they want to go to San Sebastian or to Bilbao or to the north because they know the food there is great and it has a great reputation. So
Interesting.
that would be my dream, my idea, to bring that sort of a concept here to Medfield, as opposed to, let's say, Italian or French or all these other items that we have around here, but this would be that niche type of cuisine. And with that nice fine dining, I think it's important that we have the liquor license, and that's why I'm here tonight.
Do you want to tell us anything about the operation, the licensing, or?
Sure. Right now, I've been working hard and have gotten a lot of help from Evelyn, putting in the application for the liquor license to the town, and which will subsequently go to the Alcohol Beverage Control Commission for the state. 10 days ago, I believe last Wednesday, or two Wednesdays ago, I appeared before the Zoning Board of Appeals, and they approved the special permit that is necessary in the Zone B to operate a restaurant in
Okay.
general, so they approve that permit. I have plans that are part of the application that are not fancy plans by any means, but the space is a rectangle, and the kitchen is already laid out, which is what drew me to the opportunity, was the kitchen is very well laid out and can perform this type of restaurant business. My idea is to add a bar for seating for 10 to complement the seating for 50 at the tables. One issue that I'm primarily concerned with, myself and my wife, is that there's only one bathroom, and our intention is to and it's a rather big bathroom, 8 by 9, but to either split that bathroom into two and/or add a foot or two on one wall if we need to make it the room for the two.
Yeah.
So to make the bathrooms go from 1 to 2 and to install the bar.
Okay.
And the premises already has the full allotment of the full Ansel system for the fire suppression for the cooking, has sprinklers, is very well fit out for a restaurant. I have been in close communication with Nancy Benatti at Board of Health,
Yeah.
and making sure that we have all the appropriate certifications to submit to them to get their approval as well.
Can I ask, what are your hours that you want to, the hours of operation?
Right now, we would start with 6 nights a week, Tuesday through Sunday.
Yeah.
We got permission from the zoning board to be open from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. for 7 days, with the goal of people crying out for more, more, more. So why don't you serve lunch? Well, okay, we can go to lunch, and then maybe you guys need to do a brunch on the weekends. All right, well, then we can do a brunch on Saturday or Sunday, and people can come in for breakfast at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. So when I was speaking with the ZBA, with the commissioner, it was with that we worked out the hours. And when we did it, it was interesting because there was a conversation like 11 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, it's early, it's late, it is, it isn't. And so then they had Sarah grab like a folder with all the hours. And it turned out that these guys were 12, 7 nights a week. These guys were 11, but at 12 o'clock on Thursdays and Fridays. And I was like, oh, I should have gone later. But when I first started the whole thing, I said, well, it's Medfield. I said, I don't know, how late do I have to be here? I'm doing dinner. So I was like, you know what? Take the 11 and be content with it. And so the hours would be, ideally, like I said, it would be 6 nights a week with a Monday off for the crew, and just for the, people to refresh. And then if warranted, increased hours from there.
So eventually you'd like to see a breakfast, lunch, dinner?
Not really. I would be, no. I would be content with dinner, a really good dinner,
Really good
period.
dinner.
You know what I'm saying? I do have an interest in brunch, because in even like where I live in Newton, different places, it seems like these Saturday and Sunday mornings, people just go crazy to go out to eat. So really, if I had it, it would be 6 nights a week and brunch on maybe Saturdays and Sundays if
Yeah,
it was
and
warranted.
that's it, yeah.
The lunch, it's not there. It's a different time. You know that. There's no such thing as a 3-martini lunch anymore.
No.
And we're not going to, there's no one to cater to for that. And for people to come in for lunch and to have all the crew running there, and it doesn't make sense right now. The goal is to focus on a really nice dinner and let that be the operation.
Nice.
So tell me a little bit about the cuisine. So tell me a little bit about what
Sure.
makes class sort of special and stuff
Well,
like that.
it's not really anything different than any other cuisines, in the sense that they use the same products.
Mhm.
They're using the butter and the oils and the spices, and they're cooking lambs and steaks and beef, but it is heavily infused with the fish. So the Pyrenees are the mountain range of the Basque people,
Yeah.
the Pyrenees that separate Spain and France. Right there is the water too, and the San Sebastian is on the water, Bilbao is on the river, and so fish is a big part of it.
Okay.
Fresh ingredients. A lot of it is from the farm. They're notorious as sheep herders, and so they're famous for their cheese from the sheep's milk,
Okay.
which is different than the kind of the cheese that we're all used to and stuff like that. So, we might have a hamburger, but it might offer you can have this Basque cheese on top.
Yeah, okay.
And then we'll have tapas as well. In the Basque, it's called pinchos, but you can order a plate with maybe 3 or 4, smaller tapas. That would be really, my idea is to not totally freak people out, but give them the opportunity, if they want to get a hamburger, they can, but at the same time, if they want to get something like squid in the black ink sauce,
Yeah,
we'll be doing that.
okay.
You know what I'm saying? I don't want them to come in and say, geez, there's nothing here that I like, especially if they bring in their children.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But if we have that sort of typical Bass dish that is kind of unknown and out there, we'll have that, but at the same time,
Yeah.
we'll have the more known items, but with that infusion of the Basque idea. And I had mentioned to the ZBA, we were talking about the dumpsters. And he said, how often will you be emptying out the dumpsters? And I said, I hope we have to empty the dumpster every day. Because that means we're generating a lot of, I don't want to say waste, but we're generating a lot of, stuff that goes into a dumpster. What is it? It's all the stuff that the packages come in. That means we're going crazy. I said, but I did say, I don't plan on putting a lot of food waste into the dumpsters, because my goal is to work out with a local farm to compost the food waste. And part of that whole thing is sort of working with the local farms, the areas, to also get the produce back in. And have that, here we're giving the food waste, and then by the same time, we're getting produce back in from them. And just the idea of fresh and local and, yeah, everyone says that, but I don't know that everyone does it or say it, but I mean, that is what we would be doing.
Sure.
And a lot of that Basque idea, and again, it's similar to the French or to the Italians, using what's in season. Using what they have and then building your menu around that. So if we have specials that, because, a certain vegetable is in season, then we'll be focusing on that and putting that on our plate.
I just think you're good for the town of Medfield, and I think anything we can do to help you be successful as a board, I think, we'll just let you know that, you bring people into the town, you're good for the tax base, so whatever we can do to help you, please let us know, because we just wish you success with that, and hopefully you'll do very well.
I think he wants to start with a liquor license.
Well, I so move that we grant the license.
I'll second that.
Any further?
State the hours.
I think he,
The ZBA hours was 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
11 p.m.
My hours for the dinner time hours would be probably, we'll be there a little bit earlier, but maybe 4 o'clock till 11 p.m.
We'll go with, the ZBA then, the ruling and stuff like that, to match their hours and stuff.
Any expansion of alcohol hours, even an hour
Yeah.
earlier, will require you have to come back in
Yeah.
advance.
So,
What, Richard, you're-
Up beyond the ZBA hours,
For 11
Yeah.
a.m.
if we change the ZBA hours,
Okay.
is what he's saying. It's better for you if we match the ZBA hours, I think is what
Ideally.
Mark is
11,
suggesting.
yeah. 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
So,
Even though you're not gonna do that.
you said we go by the ZBA?
I don't think even with the 6 a.m., if we're doing egg, I don't think technically by the state, you can't do alcohol till
Probably
8 a.m. anyway, but I mean, I'm just saying.
Well, there's a couple of things going on here, okay? First of all, we have a special permit requirement in Medfield for food establishments, so that's independent of alcohol or common vics licensing, which is under your jurisdiction. From a zoning standpoint, the ZBA is the outer limits, whatever hours they've set at the moment. So that's that. Then you have independent authority for common victuals, which is sit-down restaurants, as well as alcohol licenses in conjunction with that. So those hours become a subset of whatever the ZBA. They can be equal to the ZBA, subject to alcohol can't be served Sundays before 11, I believe. I think there's some exception to ask for 10 under certain circumstances, but,
Holidays or something.
right,
I think,
that's
but
11.
That's an ABCC regulation.
Right.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's statutory. I believe it's 11 a.m. on Sunday.
Mark, if we're required in our approval to state the hours, could I ask you to maybe make a recommendation to us as to what hours you would recommend to us?
Well, apparently, it's the outer end of it, and he appears to be satisfied with 11, which is really the ABCC, that's the state minimum standard. If you're gonna give a license, it's to 11. You then have discretion to go later than 11. That's a local discretion. So if all he wants is 11, then,
Just we'll go
set
for
the
now.
nights from up to 11, and the start times, I read 4 o'clock. Was there something you want to start earlier than 4?
If warranted, if there was a cry for lunch, you know what I'm saying? So I'd rather have it,
He's
Say 11
he's
a.m.
saying that he might do lunch and that he
Brunch, so I
might do
wanna limit
brunch,
it.
and so that we don't want to
Well, there's
make him have to
anything
come
more than
back.
that. I haven't seen.
They said 6 o'clock, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m.
I would just give them the
11 a.m.
same hours for starts that the other restaurants in town have on the weekends for alcohol.
Well, that makes it
What
complicated.
is
I
that?
think it's.
We don't know
11.
that.
Yeah, I don't know,
11 a.m.
I would say 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
11 a.m. to 11 p.m.?
There we go, we've got a decision. So could
All
you
right.
maybe amend your motion, Mr. DeSordi?
I'll amend that so that the liquor license hours would be 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
I
Do we
will
have a second?
second that.
Is there any further discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
And can I just ask a couple questions, just for informational purposes? Have you done restaurants before?
yes, I have. I have three brothers, but two of them and I owned and operated a restaurant bar in Watertown.
Okay.
And more than happy to have, we had a great relationship with the Watertown Police Department, with the Town Hall, with the Licensing Department, and the Board of Health. We owned and operated for 17 years.
Oh, wow. So, and are you going to be continuing with that one as well? or-
No, what happened there was, in 2005, my brother, 2 years my elder, died suddenly
Oh,
one
I'm
night.
sorry to hear that.
And because it was a bar restaurant, and we had actually, it was a fun place, but after that had happened, people came in and all they could think of was my brother John behind the bar, and it was a different type of emotion. And my brother Peter and I stayed with it for a year because we didn't want to have like a fire sale. People knew that he had passed away, obviously, and so on and so forth. So we did, and we tried to make a go of it, but it was just a different type of going to work scenario day
Yeah,
in, day
just
out.
didn't feel it, yeah.
And so we sold it, and I always said to myself, even back then, I was like, I want to do something on my own. But then after that, I was like, well, you know what? Sometime, if I can find the right place, then I'll try to do something on my own.
What was the name of the place in
The
Watertown?
Busy Bee Pub,
Busy Bee. What street was it on?
451 Main Street in Watertown.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was, in terms of the process of getting licensed by the town of Medfield. When did you start that? How have you found it? Did it go as fast as you wanted it to? I imagine it never goes as fast as you want it to, probably, but,
Well, I would say tonight was extremely fast, and I'm incredibly grateful. The zoning board meeting was also fast, because they voted on the spot. And as far as dealing with the town, I can't say enough about Evelyn. And
Good.
I've spoken with John Naff, who's been great, and Nancy Bonatti by phone and email, and Sarah Raposa has also been great. So I would say wonderful.
good. How long ago did you start the process? How many months ago?
When did I first walk? No, I would say probably a solid 6 weeks ago, maybe
Oh,
2
that's
months
great.
ago. Time's been flying by now. It's almost May, so it's like, I think it was back in February, so.
Yes.
Do you have a signed ZBA decision in hand or not? Just a vote?
I have an email copy. I don't have it in.
No, I'm not asking to see it. I mean, they used to just.
No, she sent it, yeah. In fact, I think today or yesterday was the expiration of the 10-day waiting period.
The appeal
Before she
date.
could actually send it to, or.
20-day waiting period.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an appeal period, so they have to
Oh,
wait.
no, the appeal period, yeah, I'm sorry, no. She sent me the decision.
Yeah.
Good.
And then said, I'll send you the final, once the appeal
the appeal
window
period's
is
up.
up.
Oh, that's great.
When do you actually hope to open up?
Well, I was also told that once this decision goes to the Mass ABCC, they have up to 60 days to, if I'm correct, to give their decision. So on the outside, 60 days, on the inside, less, but now that this step has been achieved, it's kind of full blast ahead. So we don't have to do a lot of work,
Yeah.
but ideally, our lease is set for June 1st. So if we're in there by June 1st, I would be happy with that.
Oh, great.
Don't be discouraged, summer is the slow season in Medfield.
I know, and I'm trying to plan my, I know. That's all right. It's slow in Newton too, and Needham, and then everywhere else, everyone's down the Cape, right, or wherever they go. But I've been speaking with, I've got a chef who's got a lot of experience, and so we've been talking about, it'll be good to work out the kinks. And come September, we'll be hitting on all cylinders with, as far as a trained wait staff and working out the kinks with the menu and stuff like that, so I'm
Since you,
prepared for that.
since you talked about farming in the Basque region, if you really want to get into it, we have an article on town meeting warrant. The Conservation Commission has some land at the southern end of town that they're thinking of leasing for farming. So you
Really?
might want to grow your own vegetables down there. So
I'll
If you
take
don't
that
have
under
enough time.
advisement for sure,
Yeah,
absolutely, that'd be
so-
great.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you was, you don't sound like you're from Spain. How did you learn to cook the Basque food? At home, obviously.
Yeah, I was born here in Massachusetts, and I grew up in Newton and Needham and graduated from High School. My father was born in Spain.
So you were fortunate enough to have some
Yes.
some Basque
And
people in the family. Good.
His parents emigrated to the United States through Toronto once my father was here.
Yeah.
My father, I've actually been reading up on it the last few weeks. I got a book on Spanish history, which I didn't know a whole lot about, because growing up, we were always told that we were Basque, that we weren't really Spanish. And there's a little conflict there. And, you know, the Basque think that they're, like anyone else, think they're the best. And so, you know, and then part of that is they got the best food. You know, so that's their key. That's how they prove it, you know. My mother was born here in Everett. Her dad was born in Spain and was from Lacatio, which is a small fishing village. And her family, my mother's maiden name is De Garavilla, her family was from a family of tuna fishermen.
Oh, okay.
And tuna's a big staple out there.
Oh,
and,
okay. So is it going to be a lot of
so
family?
my mother was the one that I learned my cooking from my mother.
Yeah.
And the food, the staples sort of that I grew up on that were what I thought were American foods until I got to elementary school. What is that? You know, so.
Well, welcome to Medfield, and hope
Thank you
it's a
so
great
much.
success. Thank you.
I really
Thank you.
appreciate it. Can I shake your hands or is that?
No, that's fine.
Good luck.
Can you pronounce your last name again?
First name is Teddy. And last name is Haregi.
Haregi.
The J is pronounced with
Thank
an
you.
H.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
So the J is pronounced like an H and everything else just kind of falls. Haregi. You're all welcome to come down. Good luck.
Thank you.
Good luck.
But we're becoming quite international. We have Japanese, Peruvian, and now Basque restaurants in
Very
town.
exciting.
We're such a diverse community.
Yes, we even have a Belgian
Oh,
select.
I know, that's true.
Our next appointment is at 7:30, Evergreen Way, Stony Brook, Spring Valley Road residents to discuss the proposed telecommunications tower located at Junction Street in Dover, but access through Medfield.
So I'm not sure how I top that. Now there. Well, first, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. I did bring copies. I don't know if you have that I can provide to everybody, if you've seen the notice that's come out. So essentially, this notice of public hearing is from the town of Dover, and it's for a meeting on May 1st, where they're going to talk about approving a 92-foot cell tower. The reason we're here is that this has a great impact on the town of Medfield. It's just 896 feet from the town line and from the Evergreen Way neighborhood. So it's very, very close to our neighborhood. As best we can tell, Dover's been talking about this for many, many months. I found notes back in 2013, and it appears maybe even before that. It seems pretty far along. The cell phone tower company already has it listed on their website as an existing tower with coordinates. But all of us in the neighborhood, wow, a lot of people aren't on spring break. I thought we were the only ones. But all of us were just notified a few weeks ago. And what I understood from Mr. DeSorga is that the town of Medfield was not notified until, I guess, you heard from us a couple of weeks ago,
Correct.
as best we know.
Yeah, the planning board got a notice of it, I think, last week or the week before last, yeah.
Okay. So I think, it's important to note that this tower is on the very edge of Dover. It's not near any substantial Dover neighborhood. And it's also important to note, and you can see on the front page of the notice, I highlighted it, that the notice says that access is from Junction Street in Dover, when in truth, and the cell phone company's filings show this, that the access would be off of Evergreen and then off of Spring Valley, so coming in through Medfield. So I know the neighbors have various concerns. I just want to start by summarizing what I see as the two categories of concerns. I think the first is the impact that the tower could potentially have in our neighborhood. And, Evergreen Way is a neighborhood of about 100 homes, lots of young families, lots of kids. If you know the neighborhood, you know it's not a through street, there's not a lot of traffic. Kids routinely ride bikes in the street quite safely. In the filings, the cell company says that the servicing of the tower requires 2 trips per month per carrier. So you start to do the math, and that would mean that there are trucks coming in and out of there every couple of days, every few days. Also, the trucks will need to travel down Evergreen onto the Spring Valley stub, that little piece off of Evergreen, down a short dirt road, and then exit Medfield into Dover. So we have concerns around safety. We have concerns around wear and tear of the roads. We have some questions around who owns that stub extension land as well. And in fact, one of our neighbors found some documentation from the town of Medfield, which if I can trouble you, sir, where it talks about giving right-of-way access to this for the residents who are providing the land, leasing the land for the tower. And if you look on the back page, it implies that it's the intention of the owner and the heirs to have it as one parcel. So, there's some conclusions that can be potentially drawn from that. We also just found, and literally just found, so I don't have copies, but from the Dover Open Space Committee meeting from January 7th, it's online. The planning board talks about this proposed cell tower, but then there's a second entry where it says, Jim described an offering memorandum on an approximate 17-acre property off Junction Street next to the high school. We assume it's the same property, it's in that same location. And it says, the memorandum would only be attractive to developers for many units. This would be accessed via Evergreen Street in Medfield. So that's the only mention. I couldn't find anything else. It's difficult to find out what it means. But I think it would be important, and part of our hope here is that we can have Medfield representatives at this Dover Town meeting on May 1st. But I think it would be important to clarify, are we just talking, not just, but are we talking about a cell tower and in addition, development of the land? Because it's very difficult to interpret what three sentences are really implying.
But it says many units.
Yeah, it says the memorandum would only be attractive to developers for many units. This would be accessed via Evergreen Street in Medfield. So certainly there's a number of concerns in that first category. Maybe the final one I'd mention in that category is the notes also say in the filing that there's going to be 44 mature trees removed. All the site tests they did were before those trees are removed. Once they're removed, we believe it'll open up for a number of adjoining properties, Medfield residents, visibility to those towers. It'll impact possibly property values and quality and those sort of things. The second category concern I want to mention real briefly is why this location and why other locations were not considered. Certainly I know why Dover picked it. It's not affecting any of their neighborhoods. It's on the edge of town. But as best I could find, there was only one other option considered by Dover for the tower. If you look at the AT&T no coverage zone, the tower's on the very edge, and that's in the filings. There's very obvious places where it would be in more central location. But the only other spot that was considered, as best I could tell, was in the March 4th Dover School Committee notes. The committee discussed if they wanted to spend money to investigate a cell tower on school grounds, and they decided not to spend the money. But it does open the question, why that location? And certainly there are other options. Certainly there's possibilities, I would imagine, to explore with the town of Medfield, with the former state property land and the future water tower, the possibility of using that existing structure or that structure when it's available. So, from the Medfield side of things, it seems like Dover did not consider options. This was an easy choice. From the Medfield side of things, there certainly seems to be many other viable options. So again, my hope, and I think for others, is that we can have support and participation from Medfield at the meeting on the 1st. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Thanks for the presentation and all the information. Are there other people that wanted to present on this issue?
My name's Matt Perillo. I live on Evergreen Way. New resident to Medfield. I just want to reiterate the same concerns that the gentleman here stated. I would like to state that I am not particularly comfortable with the water tower in Medfield being explored as an option. I would rather, if this is a Dover-driven need, that Dover take that responsibility on. I also wanted to reiterate that if it were the residents of Dover that were pushing this, there are solutions that residents can take to enhance their cell service in their homes through boosters. I know that for a fact because when I first moved to Medfield, the provider that I had poor cell service. And so if it's truly a Dover resident concern here, they can take some of the matters into their own hands. And I wonder if this is just really a company-driven concern. But at the end of the day, I agree with the safety risk. It is a special neighborhood that is safe for kids. And the fact now that I've learned that 2 trucks per carrier is a monthly number, my understanding with these towers is that whoever builds it can lease the tower to other carriers. And so, to 5. So are we now talking 10 visits by truck per? So I guess I would just have a question, if it's appropriate. I haven't presented but here before. Do we have some due process steps that we as a town can follow? Because it would seem to me if there's an access road in Medfield that's going to be impacted by this, might we have some due process rights, for lack of a better word? Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think town council had some comments that he wanted to make at this point.
I don't know how much you want me to get into this, but the initial observation in terms of overview is, this isn't something that the town would have initiated. This is something that's driven by industry. It's either driven by the cell tower or the cell company, one or another of them, or it's driven by independent, for lack of a better term, brokers that go around and look for potential sites and then put together property owners with cell carriers. And in some cases, they actually will construct the tower. It's a private group, a non-wireless carrier that constructs the tower and then leases to the various carriers. There's a fair amount of money involved. What we have determined, we've all done some research. First, from a title standpoint, that stub is private. It was not part of a subdivision, which is probably better than not, because it becomes a private property matter as far as access to the backland. The lots that abut that stub on either side have the ownership rights in the stub, as near as I can tell. So, so that's, and frankly, there's a legal concept called standing, which basically says whether a court will recognize that you've got any kind of an interest to be protected. And the closer you are to a proposed activity or use, or to the extent you've got legal rights, such as property rights as I just described, you're in the best position to assert those. The farther out you get, the less you have. As a town, it's very difficult to make a claim at all as to what goes on in an abutting town. Zoning. The starting point, as I indicated at the last meeting when this came up, is the Federal Telecommunications Act and regulations that have been enacted under it. The industry has continued to lobby for less and less local control. There's been determinations made by Congress that this is in the public interest, and therefore that trumps to a great deal local concerns. If a carrier can establish that they have a significant gap in coverage, they can go in regardless of what local regulations are in place. The specific regulations, each town has its own, some more detailed, some less detailed. We have a wireless approach to wireless that we've enacted under our zoning, and Dover does as well. However, the approaches are different. In Dover's case, they basically require that an applicant demonstrate that there are no pre-existing structures that can satisfy their needs, and if that's the case, then they can go anywhere in town. They only need a special permit. The Dover provision for special permit does not lay out detailed criteria. It's just basically a balancing that there's less harm than benefit involved. So it's not a very strong local zoning. And as I said, ultimately, local zoning and local regulation is not the final say on any of this. So, that's kind of an overview. I'd be happy to answer any questions anybody has or go into any of it in more detail if.
Can I just ask, can you go back on this stub? If you're saying that the two abutters on either side actually own that stub, there is a driveway that goes through there into Dover now.
Yeah.
What rights would the two current owners have as far as denying or prohibiting an extension of that driveway to the cell tower from vehicles and everything else crossing that stub?
It's a private property issue. What you would first look at is running the deeds, the titles for all the affected properties, including the back property, to see what rights may have been granted or by anybody. The subdivision came relatively late to this picture. Otherwise, it's whether or not it falls within the grant of access that the back lot has. Where that came from, I don't know. I haven't gone into the chain of title to see. I don't know whether it's an express grant or it's an implied grant, or it came about because of, basically, the easement equivalent of adverse possession, which is open, notorious, continuous for 20 years. So,
But wouldn't that just apply to him? If they're going to extend off of that, which I believe they would have to do, correct? Isn't that a whole new ballgame because it's not really?
It potentially. This is not considered, this isn't commercial, this is a hybrid. That's not the issue. There's potentially something there, and that's something for those property owners to consult with an attorney and get an opinion on whether they have any rights to,
The rest of the abutters of the property have any rights either? There's about 9 or 10 of us.
no, it's because of that access stub.
That's
That
really it.
the law, it's very peculiar, archaic law, but basically, when you have what you understand to be a stub, when the developer, when that was deeded, the developer had to expressly exclude rights in the stub, and as near as I can tell from looking at the deeds with the assessors, the developer did not. So by default, the abutters on either side then own to the middle of that stub.
So that creates that legal issue as to what rights this person in Dover actually has of access over that right-of-way, and whether or not this is an increasing of the easement that,
Called overburdening.
yeah, you're not allowed to overburden an easement, so you can only use it for the purposes for which you've acquired it, and if all of a sudden you're putting an apartment complex or a cell tower in there, it may well be an overburdening of the easement.
And that would go without saying, even if that were acquired by what's referred to as adverse possession, the fact that your level of activity was one thing for 20, 30 years, now to jack it up, it doesn't follow that once that period ran, that you're free to do whatever you want.
So-
You're basically entitled to continue what you were doing.
So you acquired by adverse possession, perhaps, by adverse possession, the right to go back and forth to your house, but that doesn't give you the right to go back and forth to a cell tower on a commercial basis. But that's the sort of issue on which you're going to need a private attorney to advise you on, I think. I mean, I think that I'll just sort of randomly talk about my thoughts as a selectman. I don't like this right off the bat, right out of the gate. I don't like this. I don't like the fact that the town of Dover is using a street in Medfield to access a cell tower in Dover that's going to make somebody in Dover a lot of money, and burden the residents in a residential neighborhood with the traffic and the issues from it. It feels like it's circumventing our Medfield zoning, and the whole thing just, I find abhorrent, actually, as a Medfield official. Technically, I don't know that the town has too much of a role that it can play in this. When this came up at our last selectmen's meeting, we asked Mark and Mike and Chris a series of questions, and Mark has gotten back with a lot of information that he's accumulated in the past week as a result of those questions. It really comes down to a decision on the part of Dover, I'm afraid, instead of, I don't know that there's anything that Medfield can especially do to stop it, to derail it.
We could at least maybe go to the May 1st
Absolutely, yeah.
meeting and let the Dover officials know that we're not happy in Medfield, and perhaps bring up some of the arguments that
Sure.
council has suggested.
I was just going to say that I think it's more appropriate that the selectmen are town officials, as long as you people are fine with doing that, because you expressed that you didn't like the idea and concept. I think that would carry more weight at the upcoming meeting than just individual neighborhood townspeople voicing that.
Can I just ask a question? According to this map here, I'm not sure if I'm reading this properly, and it's obviously in Dover, not in Medfield, but it looks like the road goes along the wetlands as well. Isn't that some issue that
I don't know.
can be used?
They may have to clear through conservation as well. That may be why they're proposing to go in this way as opposed to hypothetically other access to the property.
I just wanted to bring up that I was at Dover today, and everyone's going to be getting another letter from the planning board. So there'll be two meetings that are very, very important that we show up at. The first one is the zoning board. The second one is the planning board, and I think that meeting is going to be May 12th. I'm not positive.
For site plan approval?
I'm not positive. I just was talking to the lady at the planning board, and I was explaining my concerns about the access road, and she very nicely agreed with me that the access road should be coming from the school buses. She had no idea why it was where it was sited. So, and she told me that we'll all be getting another letter,
Oh,
just
okay.
to be on the lookout.
When you get that letter, could you share it with us,
Oh, definitely,
please?
definitely.
Thank you.
I mean, this may not be an all or nothing proposition, because one issue of whether or not they cite a tower and they have needs and it works at that location, but then how it's designed, how it's accessed, all that is negotiable, it's in play. If there's a site plan approval process, whether it's with the ZBA or the planning board, that can certainly be addressed at that time. There is some consideration that carries a lot of weight, avoiding wetlands and wetlands crossings, so that's gonna, any kind of a project, so that's something you need to be aware of. But if it's between that and it's safety of kids with truck traffic coming and going, you might have a persuasive argument. Generally, the state DEP allows one wetland crossing for access to property, so I'm not familiar with what the topography looks like to know where else the property can be accessed.
Jim Cardell at Evergreen Way. There is a dirt road that was blocked off from the Dover side, junction. But it's a dirt road back in there. It's been there and still is there forever and ever.
It comes off Junction Street.
Yeah, it comes
Yeah,
off
I've
of
walked that.
Junction Street.
Got my
Dover-
feet wet.
Dover property, and goes right on through to this cell. So I don't really understand why they're trying to access it through our neighborhood.
They may not own the property out to Junction Street, so, well, that's probably the reason then.
Incidentally, the town of Dover is aware that the town of Medfield intends to build a water tower at the state hospital, former state hospital site, and does plan to provide space for cell tower antenna. And in regard to your comment, sir, we currently have 3 carriers on the Mount Nebo water tower, AT&T, T-Mobile, and Sprint. We get about $125,000 a year in rental income from those 3 carriers that we have been using to pay the debt service on the Holmquist farm down on Plain Street. So there is very little danger. In fact, we have people on the Radio Tower Study Committee over the years that there was some concern about the cell tower antennas being placed near the high school. And one of the individuals with background in this field said that that would be the best place to put a cell tower antenna, because if there is any danger from cell phones, it is from holding them up to your ear, not from the antenna. And the stronger the power signal from the antenna, the less power the cell phone has to use to receive the signals. So they felt that there is really no danger, and I've listened to several experts on this, that there is very nil danger from the cell tower antennas. If there is any danger, it is from the devices that are being used in the house. The other thing that you should be aware of, at some of these meetings, they pointed out that you can expect to see a lot more of these towers built in the next few years, lower heights, but a lot more of them. Because initially, the initial phase of development in this business was for people in their cars driving along wanting to use their cell phones or GPSs or whatever. That has changed significantly now, with everybody having these devices in their home, between home offices, smartphones, smart TVs, that there's a need to locate a lot more of these towers. So this may not be an unusual situation. You may expect to see a lot more of this because we are constantly demanding more and more reception. We have people looking all over Medfield for tower sites. We had AT&T was looking for a site in the southern end of town because they get poor reception in that particular area. Any of you have Verizon know that Verizon service in Medfield is horrible. First thing when we get a call complaining about cell phone service, my first response is, do you have Verizon as your carrier? And almost invariably it's yes. So as town council said, a lot of this has been preempted by the federal government. Senator Markey was head of the Communications Commission, and he was the sponsor of a lot of this legislation. And they have indeed taken a lot of authority away from local communities. On the other hand, we are all guilty of using these devices, and to a certain extent, we are part of the problem. But I wouldn't be concerned about power on top of the water tower in Medfield. As a taxpayer, you might be in favor of it because it might generate some revenue to help pay for all the other town expenses. So.
I just wanted to add one thing that Jim Cardell was mentioning about the road on Junction Street. I mean, when we got our initial notice, it did tell us that that was the access junction. And I'm very familiar because I live on Evergreen. And the gentleman who owns the property behind us, and I live at 24, so it is, his house is directly, it's his property where the tower is going to be. So, but he does not own the property, as we said, up on Junction. But he is the one that put those big boulders there. Because for the first 10 or 15 years we lived in that neighborhood, people drove back there off of Junction Street all the time.
And snowmobiles.
Snowmobiles and Jeeps. You remember they had the model airplanes flew in the field up there.
right.
And the guys used to come back there in cars and Jeeps all the time. But Mr. Rosengarten took it upon himself because he didn't want those back there near his property. So I think that hopefully we're going to be able to convince Dover that that makes more sense.
I don't know if it would make any difference, but you might point out that the hearing says access is from Junction Street. I don't know whether that makes it a defective notice or not. Would you?
If you go to Dover and you look him up, or this property, he's technically at 21 Junction Street. So I think that's why it says access from Junction Street. A lot of time, the people in Dover really didn't seem to understand the situation when I was trying to explain it to them, that he isn't coming in from Junction Street. He has to come in through Evergreen Way, but that is his technical address in Dover, even though he has a P.O. box. But they know him as 21 Junction Street.
I think we should ask Dover to change the name to Medfield Street in any event.
I do live at 22 Evergreen Way. But in any event, I drive commercially, and oftentimes I see notices restricting the types of vehicles that can be on public ways. And I'm not even sure what types of vehicles would be used to service these towers. I'm assuming, though, that they would have to have booms on them to access, no?
Pickup trucks, probably. Or some vans, you know, that type of thing.
That's all it
We're
is.
not talking big trucks.
They were already driving in there now. I've observed in the past couple of weeks, quite a bit of activity.
Well, obviously, in terms of the initial construction, you're talking heavy construction.
Sure.
I believe it's supposed to be a monopole, which is, we've seen them all around. So that's fairly heavy construction. But once it's up, a lot of the servicing has to do with, they have cabinets on the ground level with electronic connections and all that sort of thing. Occasionally, they switch out the panels up on the monopole itself, and that may be more of an effort. But the routine maintenance would not involve big vehicles.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I think that you folks are well-positioned then, because you apparently have owners here from both sides of that right-of-way, so that the two of you own to the middle of it is what Mark and I are suggesting. That's the sort of thing that you probably
I'm
want.
amazed that for 30-something years I've lived there, and we never knew we owned that property.
Yeah, and we've been wondering how come you didn't
No.
plow it.
There you go.
We have trouble getting the town to plow the part that is town property.
Watch out, you may have people with checkbooks knocking at your door.
So from the things that Mark mentioned, one of the things I'll suggest to you was that I heard him say that interested me was that under the Dover zoning bylaw that they need to show that there's no other pre-existing structure that would satisfy the need. It seems to me that there's one of those school structures that might well satisfy the need quite readily, so I'd keep that in mind as you approach this with the ZBA in Dover.
Yeah, the other thing that I would advise you, aside from the immediate abutters on the access to having an attorney, because that's a real estate law issue to review the states of title and who has what rights. If you're looking at the big picture, you might be well advised to get together as a group and retain the services of an engineering firm that can come in, particularly if you're talking the planning board with a site plan approval, and propose alternates to what it is that they're proposing. As I said, you're dealing with well-moneyed, well-financed applicants here. And even if the ZBA is sympathetic to you, for you all to come in and one after another say, we don't want this in our neighborhood, and for whatever reasons or no reasons, that's got virtually no legal weight at all. If you've at least retained some consultants that have the qualifications to back you up, whether to kind of dovetail with what Pete said, there are actually consultants out there that will evaluate gaps in coverage and what's needed to fill coverage, whether they have a gap or they don't have a gap. That's not fine science. You can have different consultants disagreeing on that topic. Then, as I said, there's engineers for layouts and access and all that sort of thing. And just because they're proposing something and even perhaps insisting that that's the only way to do it, doesn't mean that's so. But you need somebody with the qualifications that can challenge that. So you might want to think about, as I've advised private clients in the past, having a group meeting and coming up with some kind of a game plan and how you want to proceed on this thing. Because unfortunately, the town legally is not in a very strong position to do anything as a town. There's a line of cases, frankly, that have nothing to do with cell towers, but have to do with developments in one town, access to the other town, where the courts have basically rejected the claims of the accessing town and saying, that's too bad, that's just the way things are. We don't recognize that you've got any independent rights town. So one leading case was from down in Weymouth. It's been on the books for years, the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts, and there's been a more recent iteration of that. So
We were brainstorming last week about the town taking the stub and preventing the access that way, and Mark came up with reasons why that cannot work in the past week, so that the town of Medfield does not have great answers for you, unfortunately, other than that, personally, as I say, I don't like the idea of it, but.
I mean,
Yes.
we've actually, we had a wireless zoning overlay district, which we enacted here 15 or so years ago, and since the technology had changed, as Mike summarized it a few minutes ago, we reconvened we're fortunate to have a couple of very highly qualified technical people living here in town, from an engineering standpoint, and I brought the latest legal thinking, and we were able to really rewrite our overlay district to protect the town and somebody proposing to do something within the confines of Medfield to the extent possible. But if other towns aren't doing the same thing, then we'll all kind of we have our hands tied when it comes to that.
Mr. Harrington.
Yeah, J.C. Harrington. I live on Long Meadow Road, and even though we're on Long Meadow, not one of the roads that's specified here, I'm not naive enough not to think that the trucks are still not going to come down Long Meadow, depending on which direction they're coming from, and then turn over to get to Evergreen Way. So obviously, there's more neighborhood folks and more streets that are affected even than what's listed here. I know our town council said that the town isn't in a strong position to do anything on this, but yet, obviously, we have a town council, we have town engineering boards, we have other boards. So I guess is the word that you're saying that it's up to the townspeople themselves to fund this and deal with this, that the town either can't legally or can't financially assist with that? Is that what you're saying?
We actually don't have a town engineer. That's one of the positions that we don't have in town. I don't, Mike, do you think there's any basis for the town to do anything on this?
As you guys always remind me, I'm not a lawyer, so I'll have to rely on your judgment on that one. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, again, I represent the town, and that's kind of a concept. And in order to be able to do that, there has to be some recognizable town interest. It's by analogy, we had an issue some years ago where people were adamantly opposed to proposed subdivisions up abutting Rocky Woods, and they were all old cart roads up there, and there was an attempt to get the town to take action to stop this development. And there was no legal support for that. The rights in those trails are the public at large, they're not even townspeople. And after researching it, there was nothing I could do. A group of friends of the Forest and Trails formed and did battle with the developer for a while, but that was done privately, so.
Is there any legal course of action that you can think of that the town could take concerning this?
It certainly doesn't hurt to express concerns, and to the extent that you can get any of the people here that it falls under the jurisdiction, whether it's, the police chief, the fire chief, the head of DPW, if they see any interest, and they can express them as concerns to the Dover ZBA. As I said, I mean, I suspect the Dover ZBA is somewhat sympathetic, but their hands are tied too, because ultimately, if the carrier establishes, or carriers establish that there's a gap in coverage, this is going to happen one way or the other. And really, as I said earlier, the best way to look at it is not an all-or-nothing approach, but from a design standpoint, particularly access, which is the biggest thing I've heard articulated, is there an alternate way of getting access in here, whether it's through Dover Sherburne's school property, or what other properties this are included in this Mr. Whatever his name is, his property.
Rosengarten, well, Gardner, he changed his name to Gardner. But
And that's where an engineer could come in. A civil engineering firm can look at what they're proposing, can look at the topography, can look at the wetlands and say, well, you could come in from here, and this is how you would do it. And then you present that to the ZBA or the planning board. It's probably, from what you're saying, the planning board, I suspect it's a site plan approval process, which is just that. They can't deny, and again, I'm not really, I looked at the wireless provisions, but I didn't look at the entire zoning bylaw, so I'm assuming it's a site plan approval process. And what that means is the board can tweak the plan, but they can't outright deny it. So that's why it's incumbent on you to provide reasonable alternatives to what's being shown.
Well, I think that everybody here we're here because we were here for your support, and we're hoping that the town will help us in this endeavor. And if for no other reason, I mean, I've already raised my children, they're grown, but that is a neighborhood that has probably one of the highest population of young children in the town. It is loaded with young kids. And so I will probably not be living there 5 or 10 years from now, but I feel very badly for young families that have moved in there. And I also question the fact that the literature, the notice we got, stated that the access road would be Junction Street. So I don't quite know how all of a sudden they could change that.
Although technically in reading this again, when you read it, it says an access road at the property at Junction Street. It doesn't say the access will be from Junction Street.
Mark, can I ask a
It's a
question?
tricky wording. I made the same mistake that you did the first time I read it.
Is it reasonable to expect that there will be an environmental impact report or whatever that the provider or the builder would have to submit? Mark, do you have any idea whether a structure would require that?
Obviously, everybody's bylaws are different in terms of what filings they require. There were fairly detailed filings. Other than wetlands per se, I don't know that it would warrant anything beyond that from a quote-unquote environmental filing.
So presumably their Concom or the equivalent thereof would have to approve that, because there is wetland shown on one of the maps.
Well, if they're building within jurisdiction. I mean, you could have wetlands
That's
and
true,
you're not
too.
going anywhere near them,
That's true.
so it doesn't matter. But if you're going to do work either in the wetlands or a buffer or anything called a resource under the bylaw, then you need to file with the Concom.
So I wonder if we might ask our selectmen, whatever, to contact the selectmen in Dover and find out if any of those filings have been made or anything along those lines.
We can certainly find out on conservation if there's been a filing.
Yeah.
And that's closely to call.
I mean, it's just something to look at. I mean, you know, and the other thing I wanted to ask is, I think you saw a piece of paper just this evening on the granting of the access to the property owner in Dover, off the stub. Could we Mark, do you think we could get an opinion as to whether that granting was for anything other than strictly a residential access? I guess I'm trying to see if we could do a little homework before, if the residents decide whether they're going to...
You know, I was shown that earlier today, and my reaction was, so what? It didn't add anything to the discussion. The starting point is, you need to understand what are the underlying legal rights that the property owner, on whose property this is proposed, has vis-a-vis abutting property, including this stub. And that's basically real estate title searching and reviewing documents. It's the public way, in a way, it's almost fortunate, because if the stub were a public way, then you can't shut off a public way. You have, everybody has a right to use a public way for whatever purposes.
At one point, you said that the only condition that would block them maybe from being able to put a tower somewhere is if they already had service, right? So the whole idea of this is, they say they don't have service. If you go to the AT&T maps, it says they have service in that entire area. I don't know if that makes a difference, but to me, there's no need for a tower at all, per what AT&T publishes.
That's where you get into consultants that can actually get into the nitty-gritty, and I'm the last person to ask about technical gobbledygook, but there are people that make a living reviewing what kind of coverage there is in existence, if there are gaps in coverage, challenging what AT&T's engineers or whoever it is engineers are saying. And again, this is not really it's a science, but it's not that exact a science. You can have disagreement. Again, that would be a matter of somebody's got to bring in that kind of a consultant to evaluate what's in place in Dover. Now, for a while, Dover and Sherburne and the more rural towns around us fought these things tooth and nail, so, and there's been an up and down in the market of these things. Originally, it was everybody out of the gates. The federal courts who had jurisdiction never saw one of these things, that they weren't sympathetic to the carrier, and they were going like crazy. Then the industry started to compress. People gobbled other people up, and others couldn't compete, and it came down to a few major players. And this is about 15 years or so ago. Then the technology changed, as Mike alluded to, with new information focus. You're no longer just talking about covering the corridors, 495, the Mass Pike, those big roads. You're now talking about bringing it into the local community. So, and then again, there was another upsurge after we started to come out of the last economic downturn, where some new players came out of God knows where, and were going to just make over things, and they were competing like crazy, and they've disappeared again, and now you're seeing the compression into a few big players, and moving from some industries from, Comcast to Verizon, to AT&T, and who's what kind of a carrier are they? Are they wireless? Are they communications? Are they information? Are they telephone? Or what are they? It's just all becoming like, one unified theory.
The Supreme Court had a hearing today on a huge case involving air rights for, and it's all over the place. And it really has moved to the highest levels of government in Washington. I have a question. I recall that at one time, is it Rosengarten, wanted to connect to Medfield Water and was denied access. Do you know where his other utilities come from? Do they go through the stub, or do they come from Junction Street?
When we bought the house, we were told, and I thought by him, that he bought his services from Medfield.
He doesn't, I don't believe he gets water, and I'm sure he doesn't get sewer.
When I was at the Dover Town Hall today, I looked at his building plan and all the permits, and interestingly enough, Dover didn't want him to build that house. They vehemently were against it because of the water problem. And I don't know if he does have a 1,000-gallon tank, but they said they would only approve it if he would put in a 1,000-gallon tank, because he could not get the amount of water that they wanted, and they thought it was setting a bad precedent for the town, that if that went through, other places would go through. So I think he has a well, a 1,000-gallon well. And there was no mention there about any of his other, he must get electricity through Dover. I think there's a telephone lines that come through. And he has a pond.
So that's probably all they need.
He definitely, well, he has in the past had a well. I know that only because when the power goes out, he has a generator that keeps his well going. There is an electrical line that runs through that stub, which you refer to, down his road towards his house. Interestingly, and I don't know how far it goes or whether he's connected to it or not, there is a sewer line that goes down that street beyond the stub into the dirt road towards his house. I know that because there's a sewer cover back there that I've observed. So whatever that's worth, those are the facts.
Check on that to find out. I'd be very surprised if he had sewer coverage, because I know they've been pretty adamant about not extending sewer to other towns.
The plans for the house showed a huge leaching field for the septic, and that's actually, well, it's kind of in the wetland area, but it is, the leaching field is behind, it's right on the Dover-Medfield line. That's his leaching field, when I looked at those plans.
That may be what the septic coverage
Yeah, you're back
says
there.
to the leaching field, yeah.
I appreciate your advice and counsel. I just want to make sure I've covered the other question I had. So basically, you're saying the private property owners need to assert their rights. You're saying that from an engineering perspective or a consultant perspective, we could look at A, is this site really necessary? B, the access issues. Am I hearing you right? Two questions. One, is there not any due process concerns? I just seem to hear notifications that are unclear. Is there not any due process concerns that you see? And is it up to the private citizens of Medfield to assert questions about the process that's being followed here? Or is that where the town council from Medfield might be involved or not? Second question is, can the property owners that have this stub, if it is indeed private property, assert some rights without a lawyer by, like, perhaps hypothetically building a structure? If they don't have kids, if they want a swing set there, can they put a swing set there? I mean, is there anything that they could do to show that that is their properties? Thanks.
As far as what you're calling due process, the focus is the great American frontier spirit, which is every property owner has the right to do what he or she wants to do with his property, subject to reasonable government regulation. So the focus, in terms of due process, if you will, is on the property owner and whatever regulations, whether it's substantive or procedural, have been imposed. So there may be requirements of notice, but that's as much as you get as an abutter. 300 feet from the property generally is the rule of thumb. And then, in terms of what a court will recognize, that's even narrower. That comes back to the issue of standing. So even though legally you might have been required to, they might have required to give you notice because you fall within the area, if you're not happy with the result, the court might not recognize that you've suffered any kind of specific damage that they're going to allow you to object in court to the allowance of the use or activity. So I'm trying to stay out of legal, but if you don't understand what I'm saying.
I think the question was more about the town of Dover and that process. That's where I was getting confused. The things like a granting of access to someone at 21 Junction Street in Dover with an end result being something happening in Medfield. That's where I was wondering if it's up to the private property owners to assert against that. But I think I understand what you're basically saying, which is it's up to them.
There's certain assumptions here, but you've got to come back to how did this, all this area of land come to be the way it is? Are they all from a common chain of title? And for instance, maybe it was originally in the Dover parcel and different parts were cut off. Well, where did the property come from that became the subdivision up where you folks live? Was that an assemblage of parcels? Was it one big parcel wholly unrelated to this guy in Dover? That's the kind of stuff you have to find out. Frankly, there's people who work at the registry called title abstractors. It would cost you hundreds of dollars, but it wouldn't cost thousands to, have him do some research for you. You show him some starting stuff like assessors maps and explain what the situation is, and he can take it back and he's not doing it for title purposes per se. It's just to get a handle on what's going on.
As a start, I'd recommend you go to the Board of Assessors. They have a pretty good mapping system, and there's a guy there by the name of Stan Bergeron who's been there for a number of years. He probably could.
That's here in Medfield.
In Medfield, yeah. He could probably do a lot of dig out a lot of the preliminary information you would need on that.
He's very proficient in terms of searching titles too, so, he might be willing to go a little bit further for you.
Mr. Chairman, can we take a vote of concern as a Board of Selectmen on this process? And as a board, or perhaps you as our chair, be represented at the ZBA and the planning meeting just to express what concerns the town of Medfield has?
Absolutely, we can express our concerns and follow through as you suggest, certainly.
Well, I'll put that in the form of a motion, then, that as a board, that we vote to express concerns that the town of Medfield has over the projected building of the cell tower and the access onto Medfield streets.
I'll second that.
Is there any further discussion about that? Here, or, absolutely, please,
At
thank
one
you.
point, Mark mentioned something about also buildings going up there too. So I don't know if that's something else that can be addressed with Dover.
Yeah, it is just a brief mention in the January 7th Dover Open Space Committee, which I read in the opening comments. So I think it'd be worth clarifying. I guess just one question is, are those things that could be handled sort of between individuals within the respective towns, maybe prior to that meeting? I don't know what communications, in other words, prior to the May 1st meeting, if some of these things could be expressed, including the fact that the adjoining property to where the cell phone is going to be located is the school property. So there's not there's not another property owner that's impacted if they simply extend from where they park their buses a very short distance or at the cell phone.
127 feet.
Yeah, 127 feet.
Are you saying the property between Junction Street and this property is owned by the town of Dover?
Right. So actually, if you look on the map that was filed, it actually shows you 127 feet.
And that's one of the variances they're going for.
So from there, the school property line to the
I
tower.
hate to say this, but the Dover has a choice of providing access through town land or through Medfield land.
Right. Well,
What would you do?
yeah. I guess if they asked for sewer rights, I'd also turn it down, but
Well, I
for
mean,
the
if
school.
that's, I don't know what the state of title is, but that's hypothetically something that the board doesn't have authority to grant
Yeah.
access over or through town land. The Board of Selectmen could arguably grant what's called a license, but anything other than that would require a Dover town meeting action.
It just seems odd to me that it's a tower company, a commercial entity, who's striking a deal with an individual property owner. Town should look at that and say, what's in the best interest, right? You sort of evaluate that. One is you come through a heavily populated neighborhood, you cut through woods, you go through somebody's, from what you just said about the right-of-way access, or you can extend 127 feet from an existing road to get access. It just seems odd to me.
Path of least resistance.
The path of least resistance is through the Dover High School property.
That requires Dover Sherman School Committee approval and town meeting approval.
Not in my backyard, that's the approach.
Or they could get $127,000 a year by putting it on the existing structure, which the Dover Zoning Board regulations say the first consideration is existing structure, which they have in place, a couple hundred feet away. Now, I see your point, but I guess what we're saying is, since we're not Dover residents, we don't have necessarily representation. We're looking for representation without having to pay a check for an attorney to do it. And that's, I think, generally the feeling of the neighbors, including probably 75 more who are in Florida right now with their kids.
You could always ask and remind them that Medfield supplies Dover Sherman's water.
Well, that's kind of my point. You were saying that, the path to least resistance, what they're willing to do. I think that should be reconsidered if these are the sort of things that happen.
Let me ask
it's,
you this, if you decided that, if Dover agreed to provide access through their land, would you go away? Would that be okay that they got?
Absolutely. There's,
More the access than the tower itself?
yes.
Oh, yeah, it's the access.
The tower's no issue. The towers you stated,
I would think that would be a factor in your consideration.
Well, time is money to them, so I would reach out to whoever's representing the applicant and try and pursue alternates with them, even prior to the May 1. I assume the filing with the town gives you some potential contacts.
but unless I'm mistaken, the zoning board, this meeting on the 1st is to approve variances, right? Because the tower's not compliant.
And
It's
then
not
there's
the,
planning
it's,
that's coming.
and then there's the planning.
Special permit, it requires a special permit for one of these towers.
Right.
It's not a non-compliancy, it's a special permitted use.
As I read it, they point to several sections of the Dover zoning that they're not compliant with, including setback from property lines and such.
Separate. They need a special permit to put it anywhere. Now, if they need a variance as well, so be it. But at the
Okay.
very least, they would still need a special permit from the ZBA.
I guess my last suggestion is that certainly in an open forum like the May 1st meeting, we appreciate representation.
It's not an open forum, it's a hearing.
A hearing, fine.
It's a quasi,
It's a discussion like this. I guess,
No, it's a little different. It's quasi judicial. It's much more structured than this.
okay.
They take testimony.
Let me just ask one question then, so I don't get corrected on the nomenclature. What I'm asking is, can somebody here speak to the Dover officials before that May 1st event and remind them that they get the water from us, and remind them of these things, and remind them that the citizens who are affected by this are your citizens. We don't have a voice necessarily in the town. If we did, we would vote them out of office, but we are looking for representation.
I was going to make that suggestion, that the Board of Selectmen ask Mike to get in touch with the town administrator in Dover and talk over these issues with the town administrator in Dover.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. I wouldn't talk to the Board of Appeals, because I would consider that would be interference with their function, but I can certainly talk to the town administrator and let them know the concerns.
The one last thing, which,
Is that they're already aware that we're planning to build one that would serve, I think it's 20 to 30 feet higher than what they're proposing there.
the one last thing is, as this gets more publicity, which hopefully it won't, hopefully, they'll allow access through some other point, but, the town of Dover does get free things as a result of approving a private contractor to put the tower on private land. It just seems, to me, that that's a questionable item.
I'm not understanding that one. Say that
It's stated in the hearings that the private contractor said to the government officials in Dover that they would provide a free antenna on the tower if this tower goes through,
They're providing police and fire access.
which, again, you can look at it many different ways, and I'm not looking.
That's a standard, not only is it an offer, it's frequently a request. So if they come into a municipality such as here, that would be something we would be asking for.
But it's not on town land. It's not a town rental. This is,
I think we have them on Sam White's cell tower, police and fire towers.
I think the point that is trying to be made is that if they're going to get the gain, they should get the pain that goes with it. I mean, they're getting, you said it's a standard request and we do it for police and fire, but they're getting the benefits and the niceties that are being provided as part of it. So why, would that being the case, why should Medfield be infringed upon in any way with this whole process? And I was just going to repeat what Mark was saying. I think it would be great if you could have a conversation with the officials in the other town, at least to try and get the discussion moving prior to the May hearing.
Be glad to.
Any other comments, questions?
I have one last comment, and I guess I have the feeling that somewhere along the line, maybe Medfield might have dropped the ball here, because I believe, and I have this signed by William McCarthy, who was the superintendent of streets, water, and sewer in 1979, town of Medfield, that he granted the access for this house to be built back there. And now I'm finding out that perhaps myself and my neighbor owned this property. So who granted, how did that all happen? And if this is the case, I don't understand why we, abutters or people on Evergreen, should have to be fighting this battle. I think this is something the town should be working with us on here. Very much so. I think that this is something that we need to do as a town.
Something had to happen in Dover for that lot to be buildable, for starters. The fact that they apparently worked out a way to get access, practical access to Medfield is secondary to the fact that either it was deemed a buildable lot because it's got frontage on an established street over there, or they got some kind of, or they got some kind of zoning relief from the town of Dover. It's physically located in Dover. Dover controlled whether a building permit issued or not. we couldn't have controlled whether a building permit would have issued or not. That's another town's jurisdiction, physical jurisdiction.
But the only way the house could get built.
The fact that McCarthy said we had no problem with making a driveway here is an almost so what.
I think it's a polite way of saying that I think many of us are leaving here feeling that we're not having you all get enough skin in the game. These are, you know, you're saying it's a Dover thing, but it's affecting Medfield residents. It doesn't sit well with me that we're being told to hire an attorney on our own expense or engineering on our own expense. We appreciate the fact you're going to talk to some representatives, but I think certainly for myself, I was hoping that there'd be a more proactive assistance to us as citizens. But, you know, that's your doing, but it doesn't sit well with me. I don't know about with others.
I guess the question then becomes, what can a town do in this sort of instance? And I had posed those questions a week ago. I'd asked Mark to look into some of them, and he came back with answers basically that the things that we had brainstormed are not feasible. So, I mean, if there were things that we as a town of Medfield could do, I'm sure we would entertain them. The problem is that we're not seeing them.
I think what we're saying is we'd expect.
Can you just wait until, thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Sullivan. Could one of us from this group contact you after your call, just so we would have the data moving into the May 1 meeting?
Sure.
And secondly is, did you reference that there's already a plan to build a higher tower or antenna in Medfield? Did I hear that right?
There's a plan to build a
Water
water
tower.
tower, which will provide access for antenna.
Okay. And has there been a decision to build an antenna or tower on the water tower at this point?
But it's being,
Explored.
there are accommodations being made in the design.
Okay.
To permit that.
Okay.
And it's, I believe it's the Water and Sewer Board's intention to permit that.
Okay. And if that tower or antenna was built in Medfield, would it serve the Dover community?
That gets back into the issue of gaps in coverage and where they are.
Okay. Well, where I was going with this, is to, in the spirit of trying to be creative here, if this is about money and we can build a better solution, then is exploring a revenue share with the town of Dover and Medfield a way to gracefully...
Dover would be glad to take our revenue anytime they get
Well,
a
but
chance.
what I'm trying to say is if this is really a money issue for the...
Here's the problem, it's something town council alluded to way back. This is not necessarily the town of Dover. This is a private company that's going to make money. The town of Medfield building a water tower is a competitor to them because it will take business away from them.
Okay.
If we build our water tower and rent space to the carriers they want to rent space to, they lose money. So Dover may agree with us on a lot of these issues. That doesn't mean the carrier, who has a lot of protections under federal law, is going to agree with us because he's going to lose money by doing it. The other thing I just wanted to point out in response to your question, I went to bat for your neighborhood, and I was unwelcome in Dover for a long time when the high school kids were parking on your streets. So it's, we do care, we do want to help you, but we are somewhat limited in what we can do. And it's not that we're turning a cold shoulder to you and saying it's your own problem. It's that we can only do so much. And there are some things you have to do on your own because it's a private property matter and not a town legal matter. We'll help you as much as we can, but we can't do it all for you.
But at this point, Dover doesn't really know how much we know about this or how upset we are about this.
Well, I think
So
they do.
maybe, do they? That's what I'm asking. I mean, do they or?
I know the town officials in Dover have been made aware of it.
Okay, because I'm just thinking maybe there's something friendly that can be done instead of trying to get engineers and do Dover's work for them, trying to find a different way to get in there or different access, whatever. Maybe once Dover finds out that we're upset about this,
The
they
parts
work
you're
with
missing
us?
is what I said, what Mike just said a minute ago. This is not Dover. This is a private developer or group of developers that are proposing to do something for profit that the federal government has given them the imprimatur, the okay to go for.
But Dover has to approve it, don't they?
And Dover ZBA is going to be operating under a very strict set of bylaws that they're going to have to follow. And these cell towers get federal preemption rights that give them special,
But again, the meeting on the 1st is to approve variances to those, because they're not compliant.
It doesn't matter, the federal law ultimately allows them to trump local zoning on the determination that there's this overriding public interest in getting these things constructed. And as was alluded to, our former congressman, now senator, was in the lead of the movement to support the industry and the development of these things. So it continues. As a matter of fact, just to show you, to emphasize this, we got a notice, we got a long letter, a legal letter on a law firm attached to a proposal from one of these managers of properties that wanted to significantly expand an existing one we have up on the Walpole line. And what they were citing was an obscure paragraph in the 2012 Relief for Middle-Class Families Act. One paragraph that got stuck in that basically gave all the cell carriers the rights to trump local regulation when they wanted to expand an existing facility. No zoning, no nothing, go right to the building permit, building inspector and get a permit. And that was thrown in our face. So it continues right up to the very present.
I have one concern in terms of what action the selectmen are taking or won't take, and I understand, I think, the legal limitations, but would it be appropriate to very specifically request that they consider alternative locations for their access? I walk those grounds every single day with my dog, and that area is very accessible from the state hospital property, from Junction Street as well. Either way, it would be a matter of going across one stream in order to get there. It just seems so disruptive to come down to a quiet little neighborhood and build in this access. And I know we don't have control over it, but couldn't we make a very specific request that they explore alternative access, including through the state hospital, which the town intends to purchase, from what I understand, as well as through the Junction Street? Or there is a road coming in already from Dover Sherburne High School, which accesses the ball fields right behind there, which would be very simple and probably less in length to access that area. It just seems crazy to me that they're coming down to this little neighborhood with a bunch of middle-class people, hard-working people, to access this when there's all these other alternatives. And the impact would be negligible, if any, on anyone if they did that. So I guess, again, to be specific, would the selectmen be willing to make a very specific request that they explore alternative means of access, including the state hospital, including Dover Sherburne High School, and including the access road that already exists from Junction Street?
We weren't that specific in our expression that we haven't voted on yet, but it's still pending
But
before us.
that's what we were talking about, doing, yeah, exactly.
But certainly my intention, if I can get to that May 1st meeting, would be to express to the Zoning Board of Appeals that I would hope that, first of all, that they would consider alternative locations, and that, and I would suggest to them in that regard, the Medfield State Hospital water tower that's about to be built, that's higher, and that they look at the height of the buildings at the Dover Sherburne High School complex to see if there's something more appropriate there that's suitable. Just because I've heard that under their zoning bylaw, if there's a pre-existing structure that would satisfy the need, then they have to go along with that pre-existing structure. Now, the water tower is not pre-existing because our new water tower has not been built yet, but I would think that the town would be willing to entertain putting it on the existing water tower the minute we acquire that through the purchase of the state hospital, which is going to happen within the year. There's apparently perhaps some technical engineering problems with that, but I mean, I would certainly be willing to explore that. And so that would be my first goal, would be to provide alternatives for them. The second would be on the access issue to absolutely, as a matter of municipal comity, to ask them to please have these trucks go in and out through the Dover-Sherburne High School instead of through this residential neighborhood.
Or Junction.
Or Junction Street, sure, absolutely.
Because the problem is
State
not
Hospital
with the
does not
location
adjoin
of the
that
cell
area.
tower.
There's no access. It will go through other lands that, you can't drive through those other lands, I don't think.
I would beg to defer with you on that, because again, I walked through
Well, I go through there too, but, you know, I think the title to that land, I think there's something called the Medfield State Forest back there, for instance, so you need state approval to go across that. It's not like the Medfield land at the Medfield State Hospital is going to adjoin that land in Dover. There are a lot of intervening owners, I think, between there.
Personally, I think that with the Federal Trade Commission, the way that act is, we don't have a problem with the location of the cell tower. The only issue that we really, and I think it'd be important to kind of concentrate more on the access road, not the cell tower, and bringing up the other, I mean, I understand, and I'm happy with having it on the water tower and all these other things, but I'm not sure that they might hear what the real crux of the problem is with us, and that is through the access through Evergreen Way.
All right, so when I present it to them, what I'll present is the access is the dilemma.
Exactly.
But I find it hard not to mention other things that might be winning arguments as well. So,
And if I could just ask one more question.
could you just, I mean, there's somebody else that's got the microphone right now. Why don't you let him speak, and then we'll come back to you.
Thanks. First off, I want to thank all of the older families that are here to represent us younger families that are also here. And I think it's pretty disingenuous of this fellow who's trying to make a lot of money, which we can't blame him for, to put up a cell tower and use the path of least resistance, which is through where my 4.5-year-old is learning how to bicycle, how to bike ride, and my 3-year-old is learning how to play hockey. And this is where they want to increase the traffic, the flow of traffic, because we are allowing them to have the least path of resistance. And we're asking the Medfield Town Board to make it not the least resistant path. And I think that's what we're asking. You know, we can't raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, otherwise we'd all pay off our mortgages.
We're not allowing them in his private property. It would be the private property owners that would be allowing. And that, again, depends on these other issues that have been discussed tonight, but the town is not allowing them. We don't own the property, so.
I understand we don't own that, but we're enabling. We have to be a tougher, in the Medfield, what I'm asking for is the town council to represent our development, our Stony Brook, Evergreen, Long Meadow, and everyone else around it, and say, as you said, these are better ways. You know, if there's no harm to high school students, put it on the high school. That's the easiest way to do it. If it's really a necessity of Dover residents to have better cell phone access, put it on the high school. It's your own money. You're getting it. You get to have that $125,000 a year. That's like a win-win for Dover. If it's not that, then yes, let's help them figure out a different way to divert the traffic away from where, you know, we chose that area to live because it was desirable to have less traffic. You know, we're pleading, please.
It's a win-win for them to get the tower and the tax revenue in Dover and the access through Medfield. You have to have a stick to hit them with to convince them. And there is a two-pronged approach. One, the selectmen can write and ask them to consider putting it in another, through Dover. The other way is for you people to try to investigate and find out where your property rights and assert them. So there's two alternate ways you have of looking at it. Probably the more likely way is the private property way, because, you know, they don't always listen to the Dover doesn't always listen to the Medfield Selectmen, believe it or not.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
I guess I don't understand the involvement of the town. If there's construction in Dover that affects wetlands. I'm specifically concerned about wetlands because you mentioned access from Junction Street, and that's behind my house, and that is underwater. Over the wall into Dover is underwater, and disturbing that land, I would think, would affect everybody's property all the way down the street, because it's going to disturb all that water. So what is the involvement of the town if there's construction in Dover that affects the wetlands, that disturbs property in Medfield? Does that involve the town, or is that just back to the homeowners?
I would be willing to be corrected by town council, but I would guess that that has nothing to do with the town of Medfield, that we have absolutely zero control over that.
So there's no
That that's an
right of
issue
way?
for the, if there's construction within the wetlands, it would be the Conservation Commission in Dover that would have say and control over that, I would think.
If somebody were actually causing direct physical impact on what were defined wetlands in Medfield, then we would have a process. We have an agent, the agent would inspect, if the agent determined that there was that causality, then the commission would have jurisdiction to act. But it's not some overriding jurisdiction, it's very fact-specific.
So that's if any of the construction affected wetlands that were in Medfield. But I didn't think that was your scenario.
No, because the wetlands, if the access was off Junction Street, that
Be all in Dover.
lot is all underwater.
Dover, yeah.
Yeah.
And if they disturb that, that would affect my backyard and many other yards down the street. Now, the street slopes down, actually, to this road they want to make, so I would think it would affect everybody's yard all the way down the street if they disturb the wetlands at junctions.
Yep. And again, that would be a private property right issue with you and the person who was doing the development in Dover, I would think.
Getting back to the kids
Town issue.
parking on our street, they still do. When there's a football game, they don't park on Donnelly Drive in Dover, which is closer to the field. They still park on Evergreen Way.
Anybody else that has a question, comment, suggestion? So we haven't voted on our motion, so we're still having a vote on that, so. It's all been seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
And so that we'll have a two-pronged approach. Mike will, as a matter of municipal brotherhood with the people in Dover, get in touch with them and make inquiries and indicate that the primary concern is the access through the Medfield residential neighborhood. And the selectmen will send a letter to that similar effect to the ZBA. And do you guys want to send a letter to the ZBA?
Fine, yep, whatever's
Why don't we
appropriate.
do that? Yeah,
Or can we actually attend in person?
we can. But I
Sure
think
can.
that to send a letter would be a good thing, too.
Yep.
Thank you for explaining it so well to us. Sorry it's happening in your neighborhood. Wish we had more control.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ones have changes, I guess, Mike.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, a couple things I want to mention to you. The first and probably the most critical is the consultant met with for the water tower design, met with
Yeah.
the Water and Sewer Board last Thursday night. And the estimate now for the construction of the water and sewer towers is $6.5 million.
What article are we on that?
24?
Article 24.
Does that include the water mains as well, or not? Just the
Doesn't
water?
include the water mains, yeah. The problem is, right now, the bids for the water mains are being opened tomorrow.
Yeah.
But he said that it's not, that's a smaller part of the project. That's about 2.2 million, 2.2 million to 2.2 million. He said that could possibly come in, because they had a good interest in it, it could possibly come in 10% lower.
Yeah.
But that's not gonna lower it by $2 million.
No.
So I've let Gus Murphy know,
Yep.
and his reaction was, well, it's our number one
Better
priority.
get it done.
What's the new price?
6.5 million. That may change slightly by town meeting, but not a lot.
And that's both the
The mains.
and the tower?
The mains are roughly $2 million, and the water towers is
4.5.
4.5. Article 30, the pocket park.
Yep.
The warrant committee is recommending dismissal on that, and the cultural committee is agreeing with that. They're gonna try to have Highway do what they can this year, and then come back with a new proposal next year based on what's already been done.
Okay.
So it appears that that will be withdrawn.
Yeah.
I talked to Sarah and Jean Minio this morning as to which is the best way to handle that. I said, if you don't care to speak on it, then I can talk to the moderator and add it to the consent calendar. I said, if you want to make any remarks as to why you're withdrawing it, then it should be after the warrant committee recommends dismissal. They will have a discussion, opportunity for discussion, and you can discuss it.
Yeah.
Or explain why you're withdrawing it.
Good.
So they're going to let me know that by Friday.
Good.
I think the wild holly, we haven't made any progress on that. It got tied up because of Leslie's concerned about being in the resource area, so I think that'll be dismissal.
Dismiss and then revisit that, yeah.
Article 27, care, custody, control of Lot 3 to the Park and Recreation Commission.
Yeah.
I believe that the chairman of the commission has asked me to put that on the consent calendar to be
to-
dismissed.
Okay, so they did vote because they had.
I'm not sure they took a vote. He did call and ask me if that was the possibility, and that was their intention. I don't know if an actual vote was taken. I will find out, but.
We're going to call and make sure.
Yeah, I'll talk,
they
but that
voted.
was his intention.
Article 40.
Yeah.
The library trustees have agreed to eliminate the appropriation on that. So it will be, the motion will be just to authorize the trustees to apply for the grant.
Oh, okay.
And they will deal with the money later on,
Oh,
either
okay.
take it from trust funds or come back next year looking for
Okay.
their matching grant.
Do they still need town meeting action to apply?
Yes,
Oh.
yeah, that's specific.
Because there's a matching grant, they make it part of the grant application.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I think that's pretty much the changes. Oh, that's right, sorry. The warrant committee is recommending dismissal on the stretch code. They're recommending passage of the solar photovoltaic zoning
Okay.
overlay district, but by a 5-2 with 2 abstention vote, they're recommending dismissal. With a 2 votes in the negative, they are not required to give a minority report, but they're not sure if somebody in the opposition wants to give one, they have no objection to it. But
Now, if we don't do the stretch code, we don't become a green community, correct?
Correct.
Right, yes.
So we don't get
All in
the
that.
148,000?
Correct.
All or nothing. Gonna be all in.
And then there's 2 other requirements that you and the school committee would have to adopt.
Of the
20% reduction, they purchase energy efficient vehicles. And the last one, Mark said he can write a letter. You've written it? Okay.
Did the warrant committee deal on 44 on the meals tax?
They have, I believe they voted in favor of that.
Oh, good.
I'm not positive on that, but I'll check on that. I'm pretty sure
Plug
they
in,
voted in
everything's
favor.
been plugged
Great.
in soon.
The moderators
Plug-in
agreed
cars.
to take up a number of the articles in particular sequences, particularly those that relate to the codification and
Yeah.
everything that's changing bylaws are all dependent upon the codification already being in place. So.
Yeah.
And Pete, you had asked on the codification, oh no, it was on the solar photovoltaic bylaw, whether the copy of that had been filed with the town clerk. I checked with, I believe Sarah told me that she had given a copy of the final version to the town clerk, but I will check with her tomorrow to make sure on that.
Yep, she emailed back, Mike, that she was going to take care of that, yeah.
Okay, as far as the codification in the warrant, it states that they will be available in the office of the town clerk and on the town's website. I spoke to Russ Hallisey today, Chris and I spoke to him, and he was going to email Chris a copy of the, electronic copy of the codification bylaws that are required to be on the
Oh, good.
website, and Chris is going to download them.
He did send them tonight. I have them. What I'm doing is rebuilding an easier place on the website for them to be, so that by noon tomorrow I should have them up there, but an easier
Good,
place for
thank you.
people to look for them.
Incidentally, I assume you know it, but the green communities, that grant money can only be used for energy projects in
Right.
the town. It's
Yeah.
not like, here's money, do what you want with it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. They're
Right.
thinking, the Energy Committee is thinking that it would be for some sort of the solar
Um,
photovoltaic by the wastewater treatment plant, perhaps.
I'm not sure what the warrant committee's vote was on the Ice House Road private development. I think they might have recommended passage on that. But I will check again to make sure on that.
Okay.
So that,
Did we take an official vote on that?
We did.
Pete abstained, and I think the.
Yeah, you and I.
You and I voted again.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's probably about it. By the way, the Energy Committee asked that the two Green Community Articles 34 and 35 not be paired. They would like them taken up separately. Because they felt that if there was a negative recommendation on one, it might jeopardize the other if they were brought up together, so they prefer them to be discussed separately. And I believe Fred Bunger will be out of town next week, so I think it's Marie that'll be speaking on those. And but they're going to have a brochure. They're not doing a slide presentation. They're going to have handouts on it. So.
Good.
And I believe that's it. So I think we're in pretty good shape, other than that $2 million jolt on the water tower.
Yeah, it's got to be done. What are we going to do? Yeah, get it done.
And that's critical.
What was your original estimate, you thought?
4.5.
4.5.
Close.
Now, they said at first there was a mismeasurement on the feet of water main, but it didn't make that much of a difference. I mean, it's all in the price of the water
And what
tower.
type of, did they actually get the type of design? I know there was many different designs.
Yes, it's going
One
to be
was like a pipe and it goes up, one was a tank.
It's going to be a concrete base with a piece that juts out and up and over.
With a small bottom that goes up and then up.
Yeah, it's not a bulb type. It's
I
not a
like those
tower
bulbs.
type. It's what they call a standpipe.
It's a
It
limited
goes
edition
up,
Tiffany.
and the big piece on the top, it looks like a lamp, basically, yeah.
I like the bulbs are prettier, I think. There's some nice ones we see on the highway driving down.
Yes.
Bulbs, they're nice and curvy.
You know what, I said, but how are they gonna get up to service the radio towers if it slants
I know, if it's all curved.
Yeah. And they said, actually,
Yeah.
the tube in the center has a access.
Inside
ladder
it?
that you can climb up through the center, and there'll be a panel on top.
Oh, well,
Okay, cool.
Which is actually better, because one of the biggest problems with the water towers is the DPW goes nuts in terms of not being able to do maintenance, because they've
Yeah.
got wires and ladders all over the place on the external.
Oh, yes, yeah.
what's the, how many gallons versus Mount Nebo one?
I seen to me it was around 1.3 million.
And what's Mount Nebo?
If you would ask that.
It's less than that?
I think so. Well, the problem with the Mount Nebo water tower is the only water that is effective is about your first 15 feet.
Right.
Once it goes below that, you lose your pressure in the system, and it doesn't do you any good. And that's why this one will have the narrow bottom.
Yeah,
the bigger
pressure. You
so
get
there's
much
more
more
water
pressure.
up high.
Yeah.
But the elevation of that tower will be the same as the elevation of the Mount Nebo
So
tower.
it'd be nice. So
The
it'll work out
problem
nicely.
right now is that it's stagnant.
Below.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 'cause it's too low.
And this will solve that problem of the water stagnating.
Yes, yeah.
It'd be
Plus,
nice.
I think they're also putting some sort of a mixing valve or something
Oh.
inside, so it'll keep the water
Circulates.
in motion.
It's gonna be pristine.
I think
All we have to decide is what,
Yes.
which artist you're gonna have paint the exterior.
I know. Let's have a competition for that.
Don't get the anti-Wadnon they had in the gas tanks in
Oh, yeah,
Manchester.
yeah,
there.
yeah. Let's not go there.
Oh,
Ho Chi
Chi
Minh
Minh.
thing, yeah, let's not do that.
God, you are showing your age. You remember that one?
I do.
I do too.
And then they repainted it in
The same.
Ho Chi Minh. Well, yeah,
Well-
his visage wasn't as pronounced.
You can still see him, he still looks pretty clear.
Well, that's, I think, because they had objections, said that it was destructive of the original piece of art, and they made them go back and paint it the way it originally was. So
Right.
So are we all set now?
Yeah.
I think that's
I'm
enough
done.
for one night, yeah.
Very good, let's,
Interesting discussion.
Yeah.
yeah. All right, so we're adjourned and we'll have dinner.
Thank you.